Liz and Sarah, is there a land acknowledgement planned for today? I know we're live.
There is not. We could pay respect to all the different lands that we're on. I know
Yes,
Emma, June and Rose had a very thoughtful training on it.
Yes, we actually have one prepared specifically for Chicago, if any other Chicago folk want to jump on.
I had prepared one as well, but so whoever goes first, and if there's anything to add, awesome, Emma, thanks.
All right. So I would just like to thank everybody who is live streaming with us today. I'm Sarah Marsom. I am so thankful for you being here and for wanting to understand better how to elevate unpopular opinions. Tonight was sponsored by Northwest Vernacular, which is a small preservation consulting firm in the Northwest United States. I'm going to pass it off to Liz, but feel free to throw any questions that you have in the YouTube chat.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Hi, everyone. I'm Liz Waitakis, Executive Director of DocomomoUS. If you don't know our funny little acronym, it stands for the Documentation and Conservation of the Modern Movement. And it's an advocacy organization that works all across the United States as well as internationally to advocate for modern architecture. And I'm really so thrilled today to be moderating a panel that I brought to Sarah about unpopular opinions. Because while I spend my days loving modernism, when I was in preservation school, it was the last thing that anyone wanted to talk about. And they thought it was so bizarre that anyone would want to preserve the thing that I loved. And I think in the last 6 months or so, we've all seen just cultural shifts and people just, you know, embracing the things that they love and just shouting it from the rooftops and really being able to spark change. So between Sarah and I, we've pulled together some amazing speakers who I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but just quickly to go around who's with us today. June An, Rose Cannon, and Emma Turner-Trujillo. I don't know, I probably didn't say that correctly. They are the co-founders of Death to Museums. Joby Hill is a preservation architect and founder of Saving Slave Houses. Bonnie McDonald, president and CEO of Landmarks Illinois. And Zulmilena then, founder of Preserving East New York. With that, I am going to throw it over to Death to Museums and June, Rose, and Emma.
Hi.
Hey.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to be part of this panel. We're so excited. My name is June, and the three of us are just recent graduates of an MA program in Museum and Exhibition Studies, and recently founded Death to Museums, which is a group, a community that is trying to shift museum practices and bring about emerging voices to ongoing conversations about change.
That was a fantastic little introduction about us, June, so thank you. I am Emma Turner-Trujillo. I am one of the three members of Death to Museums. And before we go ahead and talk about ourselves and our background, we'd like to deliver a land acknowledgement specifically for Chicago, where June, Rose, and I currently reside. This acknowledgement was provided to us by Heather Miller, who's the executive director of the American Indian Center in Chicago. We are all located in Chicago, and we want to recognize that Chicago is the traditional homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Odawa, the Ojibwe, and Potawatomi nations. Many other tribes like the Miami, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Sac, and Fox also called this area home. Chicago is the 6th largest urban American Indian community that still practices their heritage, traditions, and care for the land and waterways. If you're able, we strongly, strongly suggest that you donate any amount that you can to the American Indian Center of Chicago. They do incredible work for the Indigenous community here, including incredible programs that could not be possible without crowdsourcing donations. So you can head to their website. Again, anything you can donate, or if you are not located in Chicago or even in the United States, do some research about some of the American or the Native centers in your own region and see what you can do in terms of donation or help is that. So I'll actually turn it over to Rose, who can introduce herself. Oh, Rose, you're muted.
Every time. Hi, everyone. My name is Rose. And like Emma and June said, we're all recent graduates of a museum and exhibition studies program in Chicago. We all work in the museum field. So I've been working in museums for the past 5 years or so. I work in early education primarily, so I work a lot in children's museums, but museum education in general. And yeah, we are the founders of Deaf to Museums, and really we wanted to create a community that could provide solidarity and support to museum workers during a time when many are being furloughed and laid off from their positions. Also, when museums are obviously huge sites of oppression for many people. And so we wanted to create a community that could not only be in conversation with each other, to not only shift current practices, but also envision what could be, what could come of a death to museums and what could come after them.
Thanks, Rose. Joby, I am going to throw it to you.
Okay. Hi. Can everyone see me? Yes, okay. Hi. So I'm Jobie Hill. I'm a licensed preservation architect. I also have a background in anthropology and archaeology. And in 2012, I started an independent project called Saving Slave Houses, which facilitates projects committed to the preservation and education of the history of enslaved people in the United States. And one of the most important components of my project is the Slave House Database, which is an interdisciplinary national study of all the known slave houses in the United States. And so I go around the United States and I document all the extant slave houses. So to date, I've completed surveys of over 700 enslaved buildings at 150 sites across 7 states. And so, that brings up a lot of opportunities to have a lot of discussions about the history of enslaved people in kind of many different areas. Yeah.
Thanks, Joby. Thanks for joining us, by the way. It's good to see you in person. Next, Bonnie, introduce yourself.
Hi, thank you very much, Liz and Sarah, for inviting me tonight. It's an honor to be with these incredible women on this panel this evening. And my name is Bonnie McDonald. I'm the president and CEO of Landmarks Illinois, which is the statewide historic preservation organization based in Chicago. And I thank you, Emma, for that land acknowledgement, which I was hoping to say. And the only addition I would make, if it's appropriate, is that we are both on ceded and unceded lands of the tribes that were mentioned. So the work of Landmarks Illinois is part of the reason I'm on this panel, because early in my career, I believed that preservation was about people, not about buildings. And that has been an opinion, an unpopular opinion at times, to bring to the fore. But as you'll learn, I have tried to make systemic change within institutions. So I've been working for cultural organizations for over 20 years. My first job was, executive director job was at 26 when I ran a county historical society. And since then I've worked for the Preservation Alliance Minnesota and now Landmarks Illinois. And my volunteer work is as the board chairman of the National Preservation Partners Network, which is essentially the associative network for preservation organizations at the local, statewide, and regional and national levels as well. So I only mentioned the experience of working for that long in institutions because I firmly believe that you can make systemic change at any time in your career, at any age. And I'm just looking forward to hearing everybody's questions tonight on how we can encourage you and give you our life lived experience. Thank you.
Thanks, Bonnie. And last but not least, my fellow New Yorker in the borough of Brooklyn, Zulmilena. Then go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, thank you, Sarah and Liz, for having me here today with these amazing group of women. My name is Umelina. Then I founded Preserving East New York, which is also known as Penny. Preserving East New York, it's an organization that is advocating for preservation within a Black and Brown community in Brooklyn, which is East New York. And it was started in 2015 as a response to the city's plan to revitalize the community. When I realized that this plan was going to allow major massive development within the neighborhood, I feared that our neighborhood would come into extinction because most of the unique places of the neighborhood were not protected. We're talking about a neighborhood that has roughly around 21,000 properties, and only 3 buildings were protected during the time that I started the group. And the reason why I started the group was because I wanted to help my neighborhood get involved within the municipal process of getting familiar with landmarking. Why is it important? And also using preservation for our neighborhood to have a voice about what happens within the community. So preservation is basically a tool to help protect our neighborhood, our culture, and our people. And that is the basis of Preserving East New York. So yes.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
So we're just gonna jump right in. And what we're hoping to do today is to give everyone some tools that can be used, whether for an unpopular opinion, an unpopular endangered site, so that you can walk away and feel empowered. As you can probably tell from, although we're all female, at various different stages of our careers, some with advanced degrees, some just coming out of, I think, undergraduate. So I think the first question I would ask is, when you're advocating for an unpopular opinion, just what are some of the strategies of dealing with making change, either internally within an organization that you currently work with or are affiliated with, or externally through outside pressure? And how do you identify which strategy is the right one? And Bonnie, I'm gonna lob this to you first. Go ahead.
Thank you, Liz. In thinking about how to bring up an unpopular opinion and really make systemic change, I was thinking about both the techniques of the external work and the internal work. And I want to say that I think they work well together, and actually think the best systemic change is when we have both. So I see Joby nodding her head. Thank you, because it is very important if we're trying to push systemic change within an institution that those of us within institutions know that we have public support, because oftentimes, especially if you're not the person who might be sitting in a position to make that decision. You need to be able to influence that person to make that decision. And oftentimes having having somebody who's looking on and ensuring transparency at the public level is very important. I think Deaf to Museums is doing that very work. They are activists ensuring that museums are thinking about their equity and that they're responsive to communities that have their culture within those institutions. So to the extent that you could partner yourself with, within and outside, I've seen those be really effective. Liz, do you want us to bring up an example if we have time?
Absolutely.
So in the historic preservation world, I'm going to bring up a particular campaign that we had, which had a national reach. So Landmarks Illinois joined with our local preservation organization, Preservation Chicago, the National Trust, a number of institutions to try to save a women's hospital, which is the design is by an innovative architect named Bertrand Goldberg. It's called Prentice Women's Hospital. And we did that both with institutional support. So we went within the system of local landmarking. And when that didn't work, we actually sued the city to ensure that they followed their own practices. But then we had a big media campaign and external pressure on the city to follow that process as well. And in the end, unfortunately, we weren't successful in saving this very important resource for women, where so many people had their children. But ultimately, we reached 29 million people with that campaign. So once again, it was a success in making sure that we were advocating for best practices, process, as well as looking at what buildings may be unpopular, but have thankfully become popular since then. Thanks.
And one of the pieces of that campaign that was, I think the only time I had seen it was you put advertising in your metro system.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. Absolutely. We had some donated, thankfully, some donated media, but also we actually bought media in the CTA here in Chicago. And that helped us to reach hundreds of thousands of people in Chicago and just start to redefine place, redefine what people might have thought about concrete and how it was used in this beautiful form, and start to hopefully change people's opinions about this particular place.
Joby, I'm also thinking about slave houses, and I'm wondering when you ventured on this project, was it were there a lot of people embracing you, saying absolutely great idea, we're going to support you, or what was that like taking on that project?
Yeah, so when I first started, I wasn't sure how it was going to be received, but that wasn't really a concern of mine. I was doing it because I thought it was important to me. And so it was something that I was going to do kind of regardless of what kind of anyone had thought about it. And so I wasn't actually seeking attention for it or trying to really get anybody on board for it. It's just something I was doing to educate myself about. And so, so really people kind of came to me interested in it and supported it. So, and I was actually a little bit surprised on how many people came to me and showed support for it. And so, which was exciting, because, slavery is one of those subjects that I don't know if I wouldn't say it's unpopular necessarily, but it's a very sensitive subject. It's a difficult subject for a lot of people, but not everybody. Like I'm not uncomfortable with it at all. I think it's something that very much needs to be discussed, just like racism needs to be discussed, but it is very uncomfortable for a lot of people to have the conversations about slavery and racism, things like that. So, so like I said, I wasn't sure how people would receive it, but have been surprised with how many people are excited about the project. But kind of talking about like advocating internally and externally. So what a lot of people don't know about me is, so I was the architect at Monticello for 4 years. So at Monticello, so you know the big restoration work that they did on enslaved spaces. Well, I was hired specifically for that project. So I'm the one who designed all those spaces and did all the research and things like that. So I was hired to do that work. So that's what I was there doing for 4 years. And so when I was there, I was doing all these surveys and things like that while I was there. And one of the main reasons I was doing that was to inform me about the work I was doing at Monticello, because, you know, in order to be, you know, designing, doing reconstructions of slave houses and be working on enslaved spaces, I needed to have examples to look at. And, you know, you can't pick up a book and read about, you know, the architecture of slave houses anywhere. So the only way you can learn about them is to go out in the field and actually study them. And so that's what I was doing just every weekend, you know, every time on vacation, all the vacation I had, just anytime I had a chance, that's what I was doing. And in Virginia, it's not hard. I mean, all you have to do is walk outside, either, you know, maybe on your property or your neighbor's property, you're gonna find a slave house. They're just everywhere. And so, you know, so that's what I was doing. But like I said, the topic of slavery, kind of how they wanted to discuss it, was something that the conversation I had internally when I was at Monticello. You know, what was the foundation comfortable saying about slave houses and the enslaved people at Monticello, and what were they not comfortable saying? And one of the things that I really found is that, you know, any organization or foundation, whatever, they really only want to you know, kind of bring attention to themselves if it's going to be positive attention. You know, no one wants to bring negative attention to themselves. And so that's kind of like, if you're doing it in an organization, you have to convince the people above you that what you're going to do is going to bring them something positive out of it, you know, because you can't propose something that's going to bring them negative, you know, attention or backlash for something. So you have to figure out, how can I do this in a way that is going to start, you know, a conversation, but in a good way, and not just bring negative backlash about something.
Absolutely. Anyone else want to jump in about internal, external?
I'll jump in really quickly. I think that's such a good point, Joby. And, you know, we're in the museum context, and what we've learned, you know, doing this project with Death to Museums is that these opinions that we're proposing, you know, focusing on early career professionals, focusing on people whose voices have been marginalized and silenced, are not unpopular with the majority of people. They're actually extremely popular with the collective of museum workers, you know, that is out there and doing this work. It's just really unpopular with the people in power, right? The people at the top of the hierarchy. And so when we think about, you know, internal versus external in the museum context, we really don't see a clear path internally, because this white supremacy, you know, museums are grounded in colonialism, right? They still subjugate, you know, Black, Indigenous, people of color, people in the LGBTQIA+ community, people with disabilities. All of these people are so marginalized in museums that when they come to, you know, museum leadership saying, or even HR departments really saying, you know, I've been harmed, they're not believed, right? They're gaslit. They're made to think that, you know, they're told that, you know, they're imagining what is harmful. And so through the experience of creating Death to Museums, our platform grew rapidly. Like we just blinked and we had thousands of followers on Instagram, and we really didn't expect that. And so I think what that indicated is that people want a space outside of the institution where they can come together, because you know, going through that hierarchy is just so difficult, exactly because it would bring negative publicity, right? If these things were to come out, and it would also bring change, and it would also mean that people in positions of leadership would have to give up their power, and they don't want to do that, and so they're not comfortable with that. And so we think that, you know, in a museum context, external change is the only way forward in some ways.
That is such an excellent way to talk about it, Rose. And I know we've debated constantly if working internally within your institution had any effect, we wouldn't be discussing it right now. People would not turn to anonymous accounts like Change the Museum or other anonymous social media platforms in which people are airing ways that they've been wronged or bullied or hurt. If working internally in your institution worked, that account would not exist. And to Rose's point, specifically in a museum context, these structures are working as they were intended. So to continue to think that, oh, but if I just befriend my higher up, oh, but if I just change the mind of one board of director at the Whitney, it will never work that way, because it was never designed to work in the favor of the museum worker. It was designed to work in favor of the board of trustees, in favor of the donors, in favor of people who donate hundreds of millions of dollars to get their names on a wing at the institution to sell their artwork at auctions. These systems are working as they were intended to work, and there's no working with them, so we must dismantle them.
But the good news is that there's tons of people who want to do that. So there's community for anyone who's interested in doing that work.
Zulmilena, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I wanted to add to my experience, like the unpopular opinion in the preservation world was actually, my unpopular opinion was actually protecting historical buildings in the hood. And you know, when Rose spoke about, you know, that they're not popular opinions, but unpopular to those in the, you know, in the group of people of power, you know, when I started preserving East New York, I fought so hard to have them listen to me, and regardless of how many times I attended the community meetings where we were allowed to speak, even though they listened, you know, it just came in from one ear and you know, came out through another. You know, and at the moment when I started the group, I was by myself. You know, my intention was to start the group, but I couldn't find the people. So while I was, you know, waiting for these new members to join my group, you know, I was attending community board sessions, testifying at the city planning community meetings, and I realized that, you know, at the community board meetings, nobody was talking about preservation. Everyone was talking about all the other issues, but nobody was talking about preservation. And I remember going into one of the last sessions before the end of the summer, trying to see if the community would speak about it, because I was so afraid to come out with this idea, because I never ever executed something like, you know, Penny or any other idea. And I wanted to see if in that meeting somebody would talk about it, so that I wouldn't have to do the work or come out, because I was, you know, so shy, or, you know, was so clueless to start this this group and do the work. And then when I realized that nobody spoke about it, I just thought, oh my God, maybe this is my life's mission, like trying to make my people aware and the people outside of our community that, you know, there is beauty in every single place, and everybody is deemed to be protected with their special unique spaces. So whenever I would testify, I would meet a new member of my group. You know, I would meet a like-minded person, and slowly but surely, you know, the people started showing up and wanting to support. And you know, it was just when I realized that nobody was talking about it, and that the people in power didn't want to listen to that unpopular opinion, I realized that the strategy for me to start doing the work was to start educating my community, and also educating the people outside of the community to see and realize that, you know, our community, even though preservation is not a priority due to all these circumstances and issues that we have to deal with first, you know, like job, you know, getting food on the table, work, and all the other issues that we deal with. You know, like even though preservation was not a top priority, we were still interested. It was just a matter of, you know, engaging people slowly in different types of events and engagements that were kind of like outside the box. So our strategy is to create walking tours, have them, you know, do a walking tour in the hood, show them, you know, the beauty of our community, because sometimes mostly everybody outside of the community knows East New York through a negative lens. And the East New Yorkers, like, we love our neighborhood. We love, when we say, you know, when they ask us where we're from, we say East New York, you know. But then there's a few people, I believe, from our community that sometimes it takes them a while to see also the beauty of our community. So we use, you know, our platform to engage our people and to engage people outside, to kind of view East New York through a different lens. So, you know, it's just a matter of using education to wake people up, and notice the beauty that, you know, we were blinded, you know. So, you know, education right now is like the platform that we use to start the group, and it's a slow process, you know. But preservation is a job that it's not like a 1 or 2 year, it's like a lifelong process. So slowly but surely, we're gonna, you know, continue building up and educating our people to build that little army of preservationists within our neighborhood and outside. So that's what I wanted to add to our to the first question.
And that's perfect, Zulmilena, because what I'm hearing everyone talk about is community, right? Finding partnerships, collaboration, finding like-minded others. And I know Emma, Rose, and June, you all found each other to start Death to Museums. But talk about finding partners. Talk about you know, the unpopular opinion that that other people love. Zulmilena, you were saying, you know, you were alone at first. You felt like, in your opinion, and had to find other people to join you in your project to preserve East New York. I'm wondering, maybe to Death to Museums, like how did you all like find each other and be like, oh my God, we have to do this?
Sure, I can speak a little bit about that. So Emma, Rose, and I were all part of the same master's program, and we graduated in the midst of the global pandemic. Our graduation was canceled, as were our like capstone presentations to ourselves and our cohort. And as a part of the social justice driven museum studies program, we all had a lot of these ideas about how to change the museum structure in all of our different interests in different ways. And so originally our idea for Death to Museums was mostly a contained thing within our cohort to share our ideas with one another. And it exploded, as Rose was saying, on social media and on Instagram, because we started to attract other people who really wanted the support network of other museum professionals going through these same feelings of isolation, of feeling neglected by an institution that they love so much. And a lot of the people who come to us were people who have left the museum field saying that they tried, they really love education, they really love what the museum could be, but that it was such a toxic environment for them. And so they had to leave. So a lot of the people that we found are looking for the same type of support that we wanted when we started. And then we've also partnered with so many other organizations on social media, like Art and Museum Transparency. We've partnered with a lot of the individual museum awareness groups like SF MoMA. And I think Sarah compiled a list of these groups too. And there's so many of them. And some of them we're very close to, like groups about the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, since Rose and Emma have both worked there at some point. And so I think it's just about like finding people who you connect to on a personal level. Like we have such a strong basis of friendship that undertaking this giant project felt really comforting, because you have people you can talk to, people you can tell your fears to, and then also using Instagram as a way to find other groups that are doing the same type of work. And so it's a lot of advocacy and bridge building. So I would definitely, there's so many groups for everything. So that's definitely a great avenue to find people who are probably working on similar issues as you are.
Yeah, thank you, June. Just to jump off of that, some of the other strengths that we've been seeing in social media, and actually, sadly, the upside of this pandemic in which we're all trapped in our houses and people are getting laid off, is that people now have more time on their hands than ever to think about their workplaces and think about who they work with and who they work for. And I think the advent of unionizing, and specifically museum unions, the Philadelphia Museum of Art recently filed to unionize, and most of the union was laid off. And in spite of that, they have been continuing to be extremely vocal about their process. And we've been seeing other contingents pop up across the country. So I think that effort, the fact that we don't have an excuse anymore to not collectivize ourselves, because we're all fed up. We all see the issues that are facing our colleagues, especially our front of house staff in museums specifically, who were the first to get laid off, already the most underpaid, predominantly by POC folk who can't survive working in an institution that they love. And they were the first to be deemed expendable. So this collective use of our power, our bargaining power to unionize, I think is one of the strongest things that's emerged from social media, especially with how brave a lot of these individuals have been, because being public as a union is extremely scary. And we see that these folks have been laid off, but they continue to do the work. And specifically trying to create more equitable change in a way that is an embarrassment to the institution, which I think works very well. If you can air an institution's dirty laundry on social media, through public news outlets like Art News or Hyperallergic, the more of that you can build, the more change that really starts to happen.
And just to quickly add on, I just want to underline, what Zulmilena was saying too about how these projects developed very organically. Ours did as well, and more than we could have ever imagined. And I think one of the huge takeaways here is that if you see, you know, a gap, an area where you feel like you can create something that will fill a need that people have, then likely there are other people who want to do the same thing. And so I think it's good to just do it, you know, just find out a way to do it. I mean, the downside to a lot of these outside grassroots projects is that, you know, they're volunteer labor. You know, we are not paid for the work that we're doing, obviously, because we're volunteering our time. So that's another thing to consider. But we think that especially forever, but especially now, you know, change is necessary across the board. And so you will find like-minded people who want to do that as well. But I think our process of growth and our process of organizing was extremely organic. We've had people message us who want to volunteer, you know, and just when we were starting out and we really didn't have anything for them, but the interest was amazing to see because it means that people care about this.
Liz, I want to tell, I think we all share on this call a recognition that these institutions need to change. I think that's common, and that there are you know, injustices, there's white supremacy built into our institutions, and that we need to dismantle that. And the position, I want to be able to speak to those on the call who are within institutions, because I wouldn't be here if I didn't believe we could make change. This is not to dishonor Emma, you know, or Rose or June's experience. I very much honor your lived experience in museums. It is different than mine, which is fine. I think I just was going to say that I hope that we don't lump all leaders together in one. I think that there are courageous leaders out there in institutions, that we are not all the same, and that certainly pushing externally for change is, as I thought, very much needed. And if we didn't, we wouldn't have leaders at the MCA as we do, or you know, within institutions like the National Museum of Mexican American Art, or Jennifer Scott at the Jane Addams Hull House here in Chicago. That by pushing for change in leadership, for courageous leaders, equitable leaders, inclusive leaders, that I do think we can change the institutions that if we want to hold on to them, if we can make them just within those structures. And the change, the difference is, you know, I think that it's a matter of time. So changing an institution from within is really slow. I can tell you that it takes a long time to, you know, to bring around systemic change to an entire field of preservation, for example. You know, but I believe it's necessary in order to change regulatory policy as well. You know, to make our institutions better, to make sure they're not gatekeepers. And hopefully to partner with other institutions. I was thinking of Darren Walker at the Ford Foundation, who's talking about equitable philanthropy. You know, so I think he's an example again of a leader who understands that he has a responsibility with the institution that he has to make sure that their funding is equitable, and also to change the system around him. So thank you. I just wanted to give that perspective.
And I kind of want to just kind of piggyback on that and say that having worked in institutions, like I agree, like one of the things that I actually kind of enjoy is pushing the boundaries. And really challenging the institutions. Like I know how to play by the rules and I know what the rules are, but there's always loopholes. And so I like, just for who I am personally, I like to find those loopholes and then push the boundaries and see what I can get away with. And, you know, and that's how, another way you can kind of make changes is, you know, is to kind of, you know, push those boundaries and force the people, the leadership, you know, the ones that don't really want to make change, and force them to change because you've played by their rules. You've done everything that you're supposed to do. And, you know, you kind of found the loophole that's forcing them to make changes because, you know, you have that external support from people that, you know, showing them that this is something everybody wants, you know, externally it's popular, you know, people are excited about it. And you found a way to incorporate it by playing by all their rules. So that it's very hard for them to say no, you know, and really give you that pushback. So that's another really good way to do it. And like I said, I'm one of those people that enjoys doing that because I can follow the rules, but I can also push the boundaries and kind of see, you know, a good way to, you know, make change internally that way. So something to think about.
Joby, I think you're in good company with all of us ladies here. We are all change makers.
Yeah. But yeah, it can be slow, but that's kind of a way to kind of move it along a little bit faster.
So, and just hearing you talk, I mean, and I agree with you. I like to root for the underdog. I like to root for the things that people don't like. I mean, at Docomomo, you know, we're primarily tasked with preserving modern architecture. So, you know, Mies van der Rohe, I mean, beautiful. If you think glass and steel is beautiful, again, that's my opinion. And we've started to advocate for what is blasphemy within modern circles, which is postmodernism, with, you know, whimsy and color and ridiculousness. And internally, you know, that's my challenge, and I enjoy that. But you know, I think my question to all of you, as we all sound like, you know, rebels. If we could ask larger organizations and institutions, what would we like to see from leadership? What is your ask? So, opposite of what you're comfortable with doing, if you could ask them for one thing or tell them to do one thing to make change and dismantle systemic racism and the policies that have been put in place to tell, you know, a very, you know, white narrative, or in my case, you know, older architecture narrative, is always what I'm rallying against. What would you ask for?
I can answer this one quickly. I've been thinking about this forever. For me, it's easy. One, start walking the walk. Talk is cheap. Like, there's always statements being made by organizations. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. Here's our new plan. Stop talking. Just do it. Like, we all know what the problems are. We all know, you know, you can put together this great statement that sounds great. Okay, great. I've heard it all before. Just do it. I want to see you do it, and you can come back and tell me how great you did it and what the plan was. First, just do it. We've heard it all before. Just go out and do it, and then we can talk about it later. But I'm also one of those people, I don't need to talk about something. I'll just do it. I'll show you by doing. I don't need to tell you my plan. You don't need to hear the 10 steps about doing it. I'll just do it, and then you'll see I can get it done. And if I can't do it, well, then I obviously couldn't get it done. But if I can do it, I've done it, I can prove it that way. But start walking the walk. And also, I mean, really what they need to do is remove the barriers. Find ways to help remove all the barriers. Like I said, we know what the barriers are for any reason. I mean, there's millions of them out there. You know, systemic racism, just, you know, sexism, homophobia, you name it. Choose one. I don't care, just choose one. But help remove those barriers. And then, I mean, that's it. And then that will open up opportunities for so many things, but just help remove the barriers that are out there, and then we'll start moving forward. But until they actually start doing that, you know, the right people aren't going to be able to be in the positions making choices or making decisions about things. You know, we're just going to keep going around and around and around. So until the barriers are removed, changes aren't going to be made. So that's my one thing, help remove the barriers. That's it, just one. So that was it. That was my soapbox. That's all.
That's great. Anyone else wants one question? Or
I will jump in if I want to hear from everybody else, but Joby, right on. I'm with you. And once sort of playing off what you just said, in my mind is give up power. So this is not easy for some leaders, but for others, they willingly give up. And when I say that, I think there's also a taking of power. So recognize that there are others within your institution. In fact, everyone else is an expert, that they have contributions to make to the organization to make it better, that their ideas are valued, not only internally, but externally. So our community is much bigger than what's in the four walls of the museum or the nonprofit. That we have a community of people who are experts about their community, like Zulmilena, for example, and she can inform us about how we can do things better. So the more that we dismantle the power structure and share that opportunity, share resources, share decision making, share information, be transparent. I think that the better our institutions will come. So, and it feels great when you treat everybody with respect, and you see the incredible contributions that they make to your institution being the fabulous thing you want it to become.
Bonnie, that was so excellent. And I think you're completely correct in that it's really hard for people to give up power when they've become comfortable, when it is something they have worked hard for or been given because of connections and nepotism. And to Joby's point, talk is cheap. We have been talking and asking and fighting. And the one thing that Rose, June, and I actually were talking about before this is what we would ask of large museums, the Met, the Whitney, really well-funded established institutions. What we would ask of the executive team is to resign. And that is that, because they have not done anything to prove that they are capable of change. The Whitney put out their pithy, DEAI statement, and just today or yesterday, they showed their true colors by exploiting African-American artists, by buying their art at a discount price of $100 or less, and made an exhibition without paying them. So talk is absolutely cheap in that case, and we can't trust their word. We've never been able to trust it, and now more than ever. So that is really the only thing we would ask of these larger institutions. This is not including wonderfully community organized, like Bonnie mentioned. The National Museum of Mexican Art is a fantastic institution whose director and mission, they were founded by teachers and educators, and they've been true to that mission ever since they opened their doors. So completely separate from that, but the Whitney specifically, we're done.
Yeah, I'd like to also add to that point, like during the coronavirus, it's been such a demoralizing time to be a cultural worker because you're undergoing all these talks about mass worker layoffs and all of these institutional changes. And we are supposed to have systems to help in moments of crisis, like the endowment, like salary pay cuts that are not being utilized. Like in many museums across Chicago, like the Adler Planetarium and Museum of Science and Industry, they underwent like 60% of their staff were laid off. And these people are all of our colleagues and friends and people who believe in cultural institutions. And so it's hard to look at leadership during this moment and say most leaders have good intentions for their workers, because these conversations about who gets laid off, like what does the future look like, they're extremely bleak. And like even at the Field Museum, there was a petition that went out to the general public to notify the public about their beloved institution and how there's not a lot of security, there's a lot of fear, and there's an administration that refuses to take pay cuts and to help the staff out. So it's hard in this moment to believe that the institution will just share power or have the workers' best intentions. And it's really uplifting to see unionizing and workers coming together, but I think that is the way forward, not really expecting museum presidents and CEOs to relinquish their salaries and their power.
I wanted to add to this question. When I started, I used to attend, some events where they would always talk about, and this would be like a yearly question or discussion. How do we diversify? How do we include more people in the movement? And then I would look around, and I wouldn't see people like me in the room. And, and like the last time that I decided not to attend, those events to hear the same question, like in that moment, like in that big room filled with, people not colored, I was just like thinking like, you know what, the work sometimes, in order for the work to be represented of, let's say in my case, representative of people of color, like that's why sometimes we have to stand and do the work, like, because it's like heartfelt, you know the people, when they're touched by something, that's when they are interested, engaged, and then they decide to do the work, because it's something, it's a passion project, so for me, like, because the city didn't want to recognize that, even though that their plan that they were bringing would destroy my neighborhood, even though they knew that there were historic resources and that they could protect it, they didn't want to do it because it would go against their plan of developing the neighborhood. So I had to kind of stand up for my community and say, this is a no-go. Like, why is it that you know that this plan is going to bring change? Why don't you do something about it? So, you know in me starting the group, I had to start engaging my community so that we could all unify and create this powerful voice and go back to the city and tell them we want these places preserved. So in 2017, they approved after they approved the plan in 2016 with no plan to protect none of the buildings. But because of our effort and community work to engage the neighborhood and to let the city know that our neighborhood was interested in protecting, the special places, in 2017, they decided to landmark one of the buildings that was in jeopardy within the rezoning proposal. And that landmark, that's the fourth landmark after 36 years of not landmarking anything else. So, so that was like one big accomplishment that we had in 2017, but we still have to continue doing the work and showing up and showing the people of power that we're still interested and engaged and that we're still here. So I just feel like sometimes when the work is not being done, we have to take control over it and start doing the work.
Absolutely, Zulmilena. You have my head swirling now with question. And, as the executive director of a small preservation, well, it's not a small organization, but we are staffed with 2 people. Within, and I'm sure the museum world, in terms of makeup of diversity, Dokomomo is not a diverse organization. I think preservation in general, the architecture field is not diverse. And we have huge, it's hard. I mean, I'm, the leader of my organization, and we're like, we have not focused enough attention on this issue. And it's hard. I mean, you know, as someone who's in leadership, I see Bonnie's, you know, nodding her head. We have two staff. We have a board of 16. How do we, with very little diversity amongst us currently, how do we make that change? How do we bring in those diverse voices when historically I was just like scribbling down, I think within the field of architecture, 2% of registered architects are African American. Of that 2%, Joby probably knows this, only a quarter, it's like less than 500 registered architects are identify as African American women. The numbers are just low to start with. So I'm trying to get to my question. You're all like really challenging with me with where to go with this. You know, we can't wait forever for the change. And again, I'm just going to speak as for Dokomomo. You know, when George Floyd was murdered, and we found out about Breonna Taylor and this, like, you know, it's ongoing, it doesn't end. And it made us all of us so angry, and we had to do something about it. And I completely agree that institutions can't, you know, putting out a public statement condemning racism is not enough. But, and you know, my response to it was not to just put out a public statement, but was to do something. And there's part of me that I'm not sure, without others on my team of diverse voices, was that incorrect? So what we did is we put out a public statement, but in my mind, if on the Docomomo website, we have a list of significant architects all across the country, men and women, but I'm gonna tell you, they're all white. And I've had conversations with people about significant modern Black architects, men and women. We know their names. They're not on our website. So, you know, I said to my coworker, we're gonna do it. Start writing a list, put their names down. We're gonna spend however much time it takes, and we're just gonna do it. We're gonna start adding their names. We're gonna start adding their projects, and we just have to start somewhere. So if I'm gonna get to a question, where do you start? Where do you start? Where do you know, maybe let's not talk about the large institutions. How do smaller organizations, small architecture firms, small museums, with small staffs, small boards, how do they start to make change, so we don't have to wait for it anymore?
I wouldn't mind taking this just for a second. I think that, you know, you raise good points. You know, if there is a inability to hire more staff, right? I'm a huge fan of interdependence and collaboration among organizations. And I think that, you know, I don't think that organizations should be putting out statements or, you know, taking action that's reflexive. I think that, you know, they need to do the learning and the listening, even though the learning and the listening is obviously not enough. But I think that finding out about other organizations that are in your neighborhood and in your community, you know, maybe not even about architecture, but maybe, you know, there are museums or cultural organizations or, you know, other smaller organizations that want to collaborate with you. And I view collaborating really as an equal partnership, right? So both people are coming in on the same footing and they're working towards the same goal, but neither is exercising power over the other. And so I do think that, you know, there are ways to really begin to incite change in your organization and begin to work towards justice. And I think that, you know, it's easy to find excuses for it, you know, but the people are out there. The people are out there who want to do it and who have been doing it. And so I think it's just a matter of finding them. And obviously in museums, it's a matter of, you know, diversifying the leadership, you know, putting people of color in higher up positions that are predominantly white across the board in large institutions. But I think that for smaller ones, it's a really good opportunity to sort of figure out how you can share resources with other people and become stronger together through collaboration.
Yeah, Rose, thank you. That's exactly what I was thinking. And for people who are in smaller, specifically smaller museums, and I'm specifically thinking about culturally specific museums. In Chicago, we have the Chicago Cultural Alliance, which is a fantastic organization that unites all culturally specific institutions, some of which are quite new or they were created in the 80s and 90s, some out of people's houses. The Haitian American Museum is one that's up and coming, and it's literally started out of someone's home and collection of Haitian American art. These institutions don't have the luxury to think about diversity, inclusion, and equity. That's a luxury that white institutions have. It has never not been on the mind of these institutions to be inclusive, to include their communities. So when I'm thinking about smaller institutions and how they can diversify, other than maybe culturally specific institutions, the Swedish American Museum is one of them that we have here in Chicago, I would assume that maybe their staff is predominantly not POC. I'm assuming, I don't know for sure. So when it comes to a lack of funding and not being able to pay collaborators of color, that is another thing. When you're asking for collaborators who identify as by POC, don't ask them to work for free. If you can't pay them for their labor, you're doing them a disservice. You are creating a hierarchy of demanding that they teach you where you have had the privilege to be ignorant and not listen to their voices, which, and again, this is not the first iteration of institutional critique that we've seen specifically in the United States. It goes as far back, of course, as Fred Wilson's Minding the Museum. It goes as far back as James Luna, who used his own body to critique the display of indigenous human remains in museums. It goes back to Andrea Fraser critiquing museum exhibition practices. This has already been happening, and people have had the luxury of not paying attention then. They're being forced on a much larger scale than ever to have to reckon with these historical injustices now. Now there is no excuse. There was no excuse before, but now truly there is none. So for smaller institutions, I think I have a little more sympathy because often they are volunteer run. It's hard to get funding to pay these collaborators, but for mid-sized institutions, there's no excuse. You need to have started yesterday to seek out your communities that you have ignored, that you've probably turned down, that you probably never ventured into before. It's beyond time.
Emma, I so appreciate that perspective and how much conviction you have for that delivery, because that's exactly, I couldn't agree with you more. And you've touched on something so important that we haven't really gotten into about funding and the role of funding in driving what institutions do. And you just pointed out the fact that I run a small organization as well, and I see large institutions, some being named already on this this Zoom call, in our particular city, who take a lot of the, who get a lot of the resources from foundations because they are so big. I mean, so they have the opportunity to do certain programming. They have the human resource to do certain programming. And it's sort of like sucking the resources away from the small, volunteer-led cultural organizations. And what is the responsibility, to share? So I mean, I believe that we can push. That is the external role, is to push, to to not be extractive. So like you just said, don't, pay people if they're giving you advice, that advice is worth, their time, their intellect is worth something. It's worth money. Like Michelle Magalong pointed out in the Dismantle, Preservation Unconference, that she's asked for her opinion about, how do we become more diverse? And she's not paid for that, So to your question, Liz, is that, the points that are being made, I think for organizations is, number one is like, to me, be self-reflective, to evaluate yourself and really live with the reckoning of what practices do you have, what values do you express, are you extractive, what practices do you have? I mean, we could talk about hiring practices, how job descriptions are written, what requirements people have to have. We value life experience for our jobs. We take the school of life as a very important educator, and so not everybody has to have a 4-year degree to do an amazing job for you. We got to post salaries because it is extractive to ask somebody what their last salary was and base it on that. Then I think if I can just keep going, and stop me if you need to, Liz. But we also have to think about our boards, so we really haven't, we've talked about the CEO, right? The CEO is one part of the institution, one factor. There's also the board of directors, and they're my bosses. They are also a significant a part of change making in an institution. They can be if they choose to be. And so, thinking about what environment do we create so that people of color feel welcome and on our boards of directors. I credit our board president is a Black woman. She is so courageous because it is a mostly white board, and it's I can imagine how lonely it is in that position, but it has brought in other women of color because she is the board chair. So, I do think that there are those who are willing to be courageous and see the impact that our institutions can have in their community and shape that practice and influence from within the board. So that was just another point. And then at some point we can talk funding if you'd like to. That's a whole other conversation. Thank you for letting me have a little diatribe there.
I mean, unless anyone else wants to jump in, I mean, we have a question also about funding, right? And the question is about donors. So if you're an organization that depends on financial gifts to survive, which the reality is we all do, nonprofits in the United States, I think it's something like 75% of operating income, it comes from individual donors. It doesn't come from foundations, and it sure the heck does not come from the government. If you go to other countries, I've interviewed people who have worked in England or Australia, Germany, and their funding models are, they just don't understand when they get here that, we have to ask for our money. So how do you balance unpopular sentiments, not sentiments, the word here is things, but unpopular opinions, unpopular conversations with having financial support? And in my mind, it, as Bonnie just very eloquently just laid it out, it's leadership. It's leadership. And you need articulate leaders who can have those conversations and bring those donors with you, because that's where we're going. That's where this country is going. And the viewpoints of being exclusionary and focusing on white European history is over. And if your donors are only interested in what you've done in the past, then finding those leaders to have those conversations, or looking elsewhere. Sorry, I don't mean to answer my own question. But you know, it is, I mean, within historic preservation, Docomomo has certainly seen regional organizations where there was really important projects. I'm thinking about the Portland building in Oregon by Michael Graves. One of probably two of the most important postmodern style buildings in the United States. And you know, it was an unpopular building. I mean, the building was not well built. It was not loved, and the preservation community did not want to touch it. And they didn't want to touch it because donors were not interested, and it was complex. And the building has been significantly altered to the point where the National Park Service said they quite possibly were going to delist the building from the National Register because of the changes that have been made. So let's get back to my question. You know, what are some suggestions for dealing with still having the funding to come in to pay people and balancing the unpopular opinions that we're talking about?
I can speak to this a little bit. So for me, I kind of think of it as a give and take. You know, so you want them to give you something, but what are you going to provide them? And in my case, what I can provide people is educating them about something that a lot of people don't have a lot of knowledge about. You know, African-American history, and especially about enslaved people, is not a very well-known topic, and especially for these like property owners. You know, because most sites that have slave houses are owned by white wealthy people. That's just kind of a known fact. And so, you know, they don't know a lot about the slave house that might be on their site. And so, and normally, you know, if you own a historic property, you're interested in history. You know, you do have an interest in that. And so you want to know about what happened there, the people that were there, and, you know, just, you do have that interest. And so like, that's kind of my bargaining chip, is that one, to get on the site, and also just, you know, to receive funding and things like that, is that, you know, I can educate them about this structure that they don't know about, and also about the people that live there. And so that works, you know what I mean? And so just kind of in general, you know, what can you offer them? And I've found that educating anyone about anything is usually works. I mean, because people just in general want to know more about anything. People crave knowledge. And so if you want something, you know, knowledge is a good bargaining chip, you know, so kind of educate yourself. For me, you know, I decided I wanted to be the expert in slave houses. I always tell people, not a lot of competition out there, you know, so it wasn't very hard to do. But, you know, so I worked really hard on educating myself about, you know, the architecture of slave houses, and just, you know, worked really hard to know everything I possibly could to know about them, and, you know, and study them. So now that's what I'm known for, you know, the architect that specializes in slave houses. So I can, you know, if you have a question about those buildings, come to me. Like, I'm the one that can answer that, because no one has seen more of these structures than I have. So, you know, so use that as a way to excite people about what you're doing and get them interested in whatever you're trying to advocate for, is educating them about something, and, you know, something new that they may not know, or from a new perspective. So that's also really intriguing to people. You know, I have a new take on something, you know, a building, you know, that you were only seeing one way. Well, did you think about seeing it from this perspective? That also really excites people. and makes you stand out and them. Again, trying to get people or organization to be on your side. Well, you look at it this way, then you're going to be different from everybody else. Ooh, everybody likes that. They want to be, special. So I think that's something that is helpful, is to offers education as a way of something to give back to people. If that makes sense.
I kind of wanted to add to that, like Deaf to Museums, like Preserving East New York is volunteer based, and we're not a registered organization, but we act like one. And our work is thanks to small grants that we get, like organizations like Citizens Committee for New York City, where they give money for you to do community work and do outreach, for work for diversifying, for being accessible. So there are other organizations that are also granting money for that same reason, and are other organizations that need funding, do they think about diversifying their audience? And if they thought about reaching out to these grant funders or individuals about, we want to do new work, we want to diversify our audience, and we need this, money to help us do this work. So it's like, it starts the conversation. I don't know how easy or difficult it is, but if the organization wants to create a change, then they have to start, the conversation with the donors, those other organizations that want to give out money, so that things could start, things could start shifting a little bit. I know that it takes time, but it has to start from within the organization that wants to change to, start doing the work, start talking, or start looking elsewhere if they can't find partner organizations that are, aligned with the work that they want to do internally. I feel that, apart from diversifying the people in power, what are organizations doing to diversify their audience, and bring those people in? When you have events, how accessible are they? Can people, is it inexpensive or expensive? Like, with the cost of things, you're already targeting a group, where you're doing your outreach, you're already targeting your group. Like, do you go outside of your comfort zone? Do you go, to other neighborhoods that you don't really do work with? Are your pamphlets in other languages? Small steps like that, like, you can't take if you don't have the money to do larger work. Then you can simply start by, let's translate our website, or let's translate our informational packages, so that, people, other people can read not just English, but, there are other languages. And that way we can, start changing the audience and diversifying and doing the work.
I just want to add to that really quickly. You made a really good point that I think a lot of institutions don't realize that from the very start, when they offer like funding, the criteria they set up when they offer it, they already set up so many barriers and boundaries that they already weed out kind of all the people they're trying to get to apply. And so, like, Henny is not like a 501c3 or like a, then they've already eliminated you, even though you're the person they're trying to get to apply, and they don't even recognize this. And so, like institutions or grantees, they really need to like sit down with somebody and like really pay attention to all the different like barriers that they're putting up before they even start. That's just like weeding out everybody they're trying to get. Like, are you tied to an institution? You know, are you an actual nonprofit? Do you have like a degree, a PhD? You know, are you all these things when they're trying to say, when you're trying to do like a community outreach project? Well, first they need to recognize how communities operate and that everyone in the community is not going to be a college educated person that has set up a formal nonprofit organization that has 10 or more employees that are working 40 hours a week, that have health insurance, that whatever, you know, just, you know, checking off all the boxes because that's the way they're used to seeing, you know, their grantees. You know what I mean? It's just, they have to change everything, just the way they think about everything. They have to just flip it upside down, and that's then who they need to be trying to target, and just pretty much wipe the slate clean, because who they're going after is not who they're advertising and setting up to get. And so until they kind of recognize that and figure out why, like what's keeping everybody from actually be able to apply, it's not going to work. And so, like I said, they need to step back, but at the same time, they can't step back and do that, because if they could, they would have done that. So they have to bring somebody in, and someone needs to tell them, you know, you don't even recognize what you're doing because you're just not that person. Like, you're not someone from the community, and you don't realize that, you know, not being a, you know, actual like 501c3 or having a college education, like that, those aren't important for what you're trying to accomplish. So yeah, so that I had to say that because you made a really good point. I know exactly what you're talking about. There are lots of grants out there and a lot of money going towards, you know, these community projects, but no one in the community can go after them. So who can tell them? Outsiders. Okay, that's not a community project. An outsider is not the one that should be telling a community, you know, story or history or whatever you're trying to do. So.
Well, and it just continues to, I'm sorry, Liz.
No, go ahead. I'm just, you know, it's such a great point about breaking down barriers, and just something as baseline as being a 501c3 is, you know, prohibits people from doing great work like Zulmilena. Go ahead, Bonnie.
Yeah, I think, you know, Zulmilena and Joby and Rose have all, I think, made you know, synergistic points, to put it this way, because it just pushes funding to those existing institutions, you know, because they're already ones with the relationships, they're the ones, and even if you get the grant, now you have so many programmatic requirements of reporting and expectations for deliverables that it's really hard for small organizations to meet those too. So I think we need to continually, you know, from the external, you know, deaf to museums and others, you know, can, you know, shed light on that, as well as I still think those of us within institutions have a responsibility to talk to our funders about that, the experience of our partners, you know, that, so Rose has talked about the importance of partnership. You know, I think many institutions operate in an environment of scarcity. And this is very dangerous for us to just assume that there's only so many resources. And I'm not a Pollyanna about this. You know, we in our organization think of abundance, that we operate in a world of abundance. And if there's, you know, we want our donors to find the project that you know, invigorates them, that they love, that they're interested in. And if that's Zulmilena's, go for it. You know, we don't have to hoard those resources. You know, we believe that there are other people who will come to the table And that approach has continued to bring new people. So as you lose donors, I just want to say to my, my peers on the call that, it is fearful to lose some of those longstanding donors. But if you're going to be authentic to the change that you are making, you have to be prepared that those donors might walk away. But as you're doing new programs, you will gain new people. If you have a theory of abundance, other people will come to the fore. So I just want to say, I think philosophically, that's really important. And share with others as well.
Thanks, Bonnie. And I see Sarah is joining us, and I can't believe that we have been on this call for 90 minutes already. But I just wanted to quickly end. I know there was one more question, but I think there are a lot of barriers that leadership needs to look at from the people that you invite to calls like this. Like, who are the people that you're trying to engage? Looking at your speakers, your audiences. I have a list of things that Dokomomo can look at, but just such a fantastic conversation. Sarah, I think we're gonna need to do this every week.
I don't think we have the time for that, but this will be happening once a month. A big thank you to everybody who's speaking. I would like to exercise that. What can you do right now? What can you do right now? Let's start by not sharing job listings that lack salary information. Stop sharing and supporting those organizations. Join me in reaching out to job boards and demanding that they require salary information. That's two different ways that we can make the small change. And think of things like this panel. A lot of us get asked to volunteer our time and speak. We can set standards to what we're willing to volunteer for. And about 2 years ago, I realized I need to stop participating in panel discussions when we're all white. That's one simple step that we can do to help elevate other voices and expand who is getting to share their expertise. And again, the expertise isn't just the people with the degrees, it's the people working in communities and doing work in a wide variety of ways. And if you are an organization that isn't sure where you can start, maybe you don't have the bandwidth to add a new initiative or what have you, reach out to groups like Penny and consider being a fiscal sponsor for them so that they can apply for grants through you. Those are a few simple steps that you all can consider doing. And yes, let's just stop supporting private organizations and nonprofits that don't think salary information matters. That's my one goal for 2020. So a big thanks to Northwest Vernacular for sponsoring this session so that we could give sponsor or speaker honorariums. I really appreciate that support because this time and expertise is valuable. And then also I'm excited, I don't have the date yet, but end of September, there's going to be a panel discussion that dives into how you can support and encourage emerging cultural resource professionals. So we're going to dive into specifics of internships, fellowships, scholarships to help you either improve and enhance your existing program or to launch a new initiative to really help support the change makers and emerging professionals of all ages in the cultural resource field. So thank you everybody for being here tonight, whether you're a viewer or a panelist, and the recording should be live and spread the gospel.
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. It was really lovely to see all of your faces and meet you in this way. Have a great night.
Thank you all.
Have a great night. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
See you in Chicago next year.